Hey there, listener. Welcome to the Deep Share Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rouse, and for the last couple of decades, I've slowly been opening my eyes to a very different world than the one I grew up hearing about. And the more conversations I have with interesting people, the more mystifying this world becomes. So without further ado, let's get deep.
We've got science to celebrate! Demons bliss out! After what, baby? Come on!
There is rebellion in the wind. It will crush.
Everything I've said is true. It's real.
Dinosaur fossils? God put those here to test our faith.
A damn lie. I saw them with my own eye.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
We did illusions, man! None of it is true!
I'm not insane.
This is mass madness, you maniacs! In God's name, you people are the real thing! We are the illusion!
Welcome back to the Deep Share Podcast, and I will say that this will be the final episode of season 1, if you want to call it that. I'm going to take a little breather. I've got The Witness coming up soon, so I want to prepare for that and kind of put it together the best I can for everybody. So take a little breather from the Deep Share for a little while. So I'm very happy to end season 1 with a returning guest, friend of the show, Konspiracy Kyle. Welcome back, man. How you doing?
Oh, Andy, I'm doing great. I'm glad to help cap off your first season here, dude. You've had a lot of great guests, so cheers to you, man. You've been doing a lot of great work. So, and I've been glad to get to know you over this past year. So, keep up the great work, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate the kind words, and yeah, I'm glad that you came on before. We've had some crazy conversations already, in our less than a year relationship here. We've talked about Joseph Campbell deeply, which is one of my favorite topics, of course, and all of your amazing Star Wars parallels to the real world are mind-blowing. And for anyone who is living under a rock and hasn't heard of Conspiracy in the Force and Kyle's work, it's pretty mind-blowing, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. And most recently, Kyle has put out his first book, Intergalactic Totalitarianism. And it's awesome. And it's a quick read. It doesn't consume your life. And it's going to get through to so many people, I think, that need to hear it, man. I mean, I have so many friends in mind that I want to get some copies for and give them out as presents. Just like, come on, you love Star Wars, take the bait.
And that's kind of
congratulations, man. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And that's kind of the goal, is to use it kind of as a little bit of candy to kind of get some people into this kind of stuff. And it's obviously not for everybody, right? Everything isn't for everybody. But I mean, I think we know a lot of people that are either into conspiracies or into Star Wars that are able to, if you're able to get them to blend some of these things together. In my opinion, my experience, using analogies, using stories, using examples, I always feel is a good way to get people to understand there's a lot of parallel events going on in our world that you see a lot of it in Star Wars. And I know we've talked a lot about other franchises too, right? Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, all this kind of stuff. They have all these stories that are weaved through them, but the people that created them, they obviously live in our world. So they're affected deeply by the things that we all go through on a daily basis. And I think, a lot of people listening to this, and Andy, I'm sure you'll agree too, that a lot of the truth that we know about our world is hidden in these movies, more so than you see on your nightly news. But you have to look for it. You have to have the eyes and the eyes to see and the ears to hear it. And so that's kind of what I did with Star Wars over this past 2 years, is like looking into all the things that went on in these stories. And, the original movies, it's kind of a straightforward, right? There's a good, there's evil. Good needs to destroy the evil, and that's what happens. And then the prequels come along and kind of added some nuance to that, that some people appreciated, some people didn't. But part of what I did with this book is kind of lay out all the events that happened in that prequel era, even if people don't really appreciate the films themselves, because I'm not naive, they have their flaws, like most media does. But the story that was trying to be told with those, I think, is very important and very deep. and especially in regards to what's happened in the past, what's happening in our current present, what's happening in the future with authoritarianism, with totalitarian governments, with people that are trying to control huge groups of people. You see that in Star Wars. You probably see that in most. You would agree. You probably see that in most sci-fi franchises, don't you?
Yeah, and it's like Dan Anaki and I were talking last night about Santa Claus and Christmas, and how every single Christmas movie is about saving Christmas. So these themes are permeated through everything. And it's, to me, my crazy psychedelic view always takes me to that fractal nature of reality, and how you have people that try to debunk stuff like this and say, well, yeah, sure, you can find it in Star Wars, but look, you can find it here and here and here too. And it's like, yeah. Aren't you seeing? Like, it's almost as if it's so obvious that people can't see it sometimes, and it almost seems like that would be something that the big bad they would be hyper aware of and use that to their advantage. I mean, it seems like sleight of hand and misdirection are a big part of totalitarianism.
Absolutely. And in the book, I write about that a little bit in regards to like the Star Wars prequel movies, because I think when people think about those movies, they think about like, oh, Jar Jar Binks, or this was stupid, the acting was terrible, this and that. And those things can be true, but whenever the narrative is shifted around that kind of stuff, people don't realize that the underlying story is about a guy who was a senator, told everybody to do all this stuff to keep them safe, and ended up taking over the galaxy. I think some of that stuff gets a little bit of lost, especially when you have lightsaber battles and Jedi and this and that. And in the book, for anybody who hasn't heard, it's called Intergalactic Totalitarianism: Authoritarian Tactics and Traits in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, in a Galaxy Not So Far Away. It's a little bit wordy, but
I love it. I thought it was perfect.
Thank you. Where was I going with that? So the point is that a lot of the stuff you see in there happens in our world. A lot of crises are created, control, and I go through this kind of thing I call crisis, consent, and control, which is kind of like your Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. So kind of change up the wording on that, but it's the same kind of thing. And you see how people are blindly following a leader that tells them that, hey, I'm on your side. Listen, the only reason I'm here is to help you. The only reason I'm here is to help you. And if people will look back, early 2021, early 2020, you can pick out those quotes. You can pick out those people who told us all that kind of stuff. Listen, we're only doing these lockdowns to keep you safe. We're only doing this to keep you safe. We don't have to get into that whole thing, but I think we all know what we're talking about here.
Definitely.
But one of the biggest premises, and I talk about it, I'll keep going through it ad nauseum, is that we're always told, follow the government. They're here to keep you safe. Just trust them. Just trust them. Don't worry about all the questions or issues you may have with it. Just follow along, and just like sheep to the slaughter in the prequels, in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, the galaxy is just led to the slaughterhouse and just wiped out. And
Absolutely.
People are scratching their heads like, well, what just happened? It was over so quick.
Yeah, and I think now that we're talking about the prequels again, which I actually went back and rewatched after our first talk because I needed to. I had heard you talk about it so many times. I'm like, I have to rewatch these things that I loathed as a teenager, a naive teenager, And it's cool that you talk about it in the book about how, it's interesting to see that movies have one layer for children and one layer for adults. And then there's the other layer too, that only people like us see. And it's becoming strange almost how obvious their ploys are and their actions are out there. I saw some clip the other day of CNN posting tweets, and the Twitter names were like dick and fart jokes. Like, it was ridiculous. It's coming undone at the seams, and they know it and they don't care. And it's this obviousness, and it really kind of freaks a lot of us out, I would say, and let's get into it. Let's talk about the body of work in here about totalitarianism and how I think you framed it in a fantastic way with the traits and the tactics and the dialectic, because all of this encompasses a way to kind of train people in a way to understand their enemy in a way.
Right.
And for me, I'm reading this and I'm seeing also things you realize about yourself, about people in your own life, about bad actions and bad thinking that you do. Because, a lot of these topics, a lot of these traits, they're not just reserved for the elite evil people of the world. They're behaviors that are passed down, they're behaviors that are learned and just kind of learned over time and ingrained in our heads, in everybody's head. Not to say that there isn't some kind of controlled group or
Right.
group of controllers, but that it's capable in simply humanity itself to have a lot of these negative experiences. And you can see on an individual level these negative traits and tactics, not someone that's necessarily running a huge company, just bad behavior all around. And it's really great how you got into the roots of it all. And I applaud you
sure.
for that, man. I
Oh,
think
thank
it was a
you.
great job.
Yeah. So the three sections, we'll talk a little bit, we'll go into detail about the traits, but I kind of broke it down, like to figure out like how these people are like Hitler doesn't just wake up one day and realize he wants to take over the world. It doesn't happen like that. Same with Palpatine in Star Wars. He didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, listen, I'm going to take over the galaxy, going to do this, going to do that. It's a very long, gradual process. And, there's a lot more layers, I think, than even I got into in the book. There's, when you talk about people that are serial killers or this or that, like they have a lot of fractured brain activity, right? Like a lot of these people have split personalities, especially, I just thought about this today, when you talk about CIA mind control experiments, trying to like break people's brains into two parts and that kind of stuff. Palpatine has a dual personality. Palpatine basically has the multiple personality. And he doesn't see it as a disorder. He sees it as a way to be powerful. But
Right.
these people, at the end of the day, these people are just vastly different, than you and me. But yeah, I think your point is well taken. That some of the traits that we talk about here, we all have the potential to have these in any one way, shape, or form. Just like in Star Wars, the one good thing I'll say about some of the new Disney Star Wars movies is they kind of bring into the concept of like this gray Jedi, right? The original trilogy is very black and white. There's the good people and there's the bad people. You see it on screen, right away, because that's the story Lucas wanted to tell. It was just a straight up good versus evil. Like you see it in the coloring, you see it in the actions, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then you kind of see Luke Skywalker later on in life as kind of like dipping into both of the worlds. Like, listen, like he wants to be a Jedi, but he also realizes that the Jedi are evil, or not that evil, they were failed, this and that. So he in his own mind can go back and forth between good and evil. I think you make a good point that we all have the capacity for these kind of traits in one way, shape, or form, and it's good to acknowledge that, because I think acknowledging anything is the first step towards making yourself a better person, right? Like if you're a alcoholic, you need to say the words like, hey, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a drug addict, like, hey, I'm a drug addict.
Right.
If you can't if you can't come to that understanding, then you're kind of stuck. So the biggest trait that I'll talk about two of the five is narcissism.
Yes.
And we've talked about this a little bit before. We talked about it pre-show too. Narcissism it's everywhere, and there's so many facets, there's so many components of it. It includes arrogance. It includes things like magical thinking, which, that's a kind of a newer phrase to me, magical thinking, but that just basically means that you just have this inflated sense of who you are.
Right.
Some quotes from Star Wars, Anakin tells Padme, he's like, listen, like I can save you. I can learn new powers. I can save you. I can do anything I want. He's like, I'm the most powerful person. Palpatine even says, he's like, I'm the only one who was able to defeat the corruption in the galaxy, this and that. It's like, but all in all,
Ultimate hubris.
ultimate hubris. And pretty much everything they say is a lie. And it's the exact opposite. And we see that all the
Yes.
time with our politicians.
And that's an interesting point right there. That's like one of the key points. So there's a narcissist in our lives, my personal life, and it's interesting where we see that fractal nature again, this microcosm to the macrocosm, where, you know, from the person that's affected by the narcissism has a real opportunity to kind of see themselves in the whole world here, because the same tactics that I see on a, you know, it's interesting to wonder how intentional some of it is on the high levels because
Right.
of how weird narcissism can be. It almost seems like when someone is severely narcissistic, it almost seems like an invading, like, parasite has crawled into their consciousness. It's
Mhm.
unbelievable. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I've never really thought about it on that intense level, but not to forgive anyone at the top by any means, but just to throw a whole different
Yeah.
angle into it. You know, it may not just be dark magic. It could be
Yeah.
a very auto situation going on, you know, like
Right.
that.
And like, you know, in Star Wars, like you want to immediately say, like, listen, Palpatine, he's using, like you said, he's using dark side magic. That's the way he's doing all this stuff. But it's like that alone, he had to want to learn how to do that. You know, he
Right.
didn't just wake up from a dream and, oh, all of a sudden I can do dark side magic. No, he and there's actually a book I downloaded recently called Darth Plagueis, which talks about him and his training and becoming a dark side apprentice. And you know, obviously Disney doesn't consider it part of the story anymore, but I don't really
Right.
give a shit.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure it's a great story and it goes in a lot of political stuff. But so to the point we talked about earlier, you know, we need to recognize these concepts in ourselves, but we also need to recognize them in other people, you know, and not even just totalitarians,
Yes.
but just people we deal with on a day-to-day basis. I know me and you both have had to remove people from our lives that have some of these tendencies, because if the psychopathy gets to a certain level, you can't even interact with somebody that has severe narcissism. It's just like running at a brick wall. You're not going to be able to get anywhere.
And the brick wall throws bricks at you. Like,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable.
Exactly. And like, so, and I talk about it briefly in this book. I don't get into all of these, but there's a great book that I'm going to read. It was called The 7 Deadly Sins of Narcissism. Came out in the early 2000s, and the author, she pulls out 7 traits, and we can kind of touch on some of these briefly.
Yeah, sure.
Of how narcissism works, or like, you know, sub traits within that. So there's shamelessness, magical thinking, which we talked about a little bit, arrogance, which is pretty self-explanatory, envy, entitlement, exploitation, and bad boundaries. Of those, you know, I go right to like the entitlement. You know, we see that. Look at every single politician, you know, and even like people in your everyday lives. You know, I'm in my mid 30s. I look at a lot of people that are in their younger 20s. They have a lot of, and I'm not saying every single person, but a lot of people believe that they are entitled to the world just by being here. And in that, you know, and that can cause all kinds of problems. Exploitation. I mean, exploiting other people for your benefit, to make yourself feel better, pushing other people down to make yourself feel better. We all knew that bully in school, right? That would pick on you, but they did that because their life sucked, and they had to put somebody else down to make themselves feel better, which probably at the end of the day didn't even work. So
Right.
a lot
So they have to keep doing it over and over again. I mean,
yep. And like envy, like especially right now, people that aren't going along with the narrative, the people that are in charge, they wish that they could have the kind of freedom that some of us have, that aren't willing to play ball with some of this stuff. They wish they could have some of this freedom, but they're kind of too far in, right? The hooks are too far in them. They've been blackmailed too far. They've gone too far. They put everything in, they put their pot in the middle, or, you know, poker analogy, whatever. They put it all, they're all in. Okay. Yes. They can't turn back. So like they implicitly hate all those other people, and they're willing to do anything they can to hurt them and harm them.
Absolutely. They use the past against everyone else. It's an externalization of it's a projection, and it's it literally permeates everything, because these, you can't reason with people like that at all. And so it comes full circle to when we always tell people, like, you can't fix a broken system with the broken system.
Yeah.
And we keep voting, we keep just playing the program over and over again. It's unbelievable. And not a lot of people that I've ever been in contact with really know narcissism on that level, and how like all encompassing it is. It's really a phenomenon of humanity for sure. It feels like a brain worm.
Yeah. I mean, the government itself, like not even a specific person, that is narcissism. It thinks that it is so important. It thinks that all of us need them. And then whenever they realize that a contingent of us don't need them, their brains are completely broken, and they go into Hulk mode and get so pissed because they cannot understand why we would not want to play ball with them, because in their minds, in their fractured minds, like we've been saying, they think everything that they're doing is right, and that's part of it as well. A part of it, I think there's probably a delineation between, I guess, true evil and people who are doing things that they, in their mind, think are right. Just like everybody that went along with the Nazi Party, in their minds, based on their propaganda they've been fed, they thought they were doing what was right, and it was obviously not at all. So there's so many layers to that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. So let's get into some of the tactics that totalitarianism is known for, because they are so obvious. And once you look into history, it's just, again, you see it repeating over and over and over again. We always reference the 40s, but you can just keep on turning the timetables back further and further, and it's the same thing.
Yeah. Some of the biggest ones, is gun control. Try to find ways to take people's firearms away. Going back to, like you said, go back a long time. Chinese communist leader Mao Zedong, he says, you take the people's guns away before the massacre. Or maybe I may be confusing that with Stalin, but anyways, it's they try to find a way to take the guns away, but they obviously pose that as, listen, really dangerous people have guns, okay? So we need to get the guns away from the dangerous people. But honestly, the percentage of people that use firearms illegally are going to continue to use firearms illegally, and this kind of stuff doesn't affect them. So you never see any of these measures really making a difference. It's more or less taking, Charlie Robinson, who all of us know, he's great. I call him the conspiracy Yoda.
Shout out to Charlie.
He wrote the foreword for my book, so big shout out to him. It was honestly like when I went on his show last year that I kind of started going down the process of writing, of getting this in a kind of frame of context. So
that's great.
A big shout out to him. But one thing he always says is that when it comes to gun control, and like he's not really even a big gun control gun nut himself, but he just knows the psyop of that. He's like, they want to take guns away before they're about to do something that you would want to kill them for,
Exactly.
Because just like we've been saying this whole time, they do all these things to keep you safe. But then when you're backed into a corner, what are you going to do? I make the analogy of, if a burglar comes up to you and says, hey, give me your guns, give me your money. Oh, okay. Yeah, here you go. Well, guess what? Just because they have all that stuff, they can still do whatever they want. That doesn't change anything. Just because you complied, it doesn't change the scenario at all. They can still shoot you. They can still kick you in the head. It doesn't matter. So, gun control is a big one. Enlisting people, whether it's useful idiots, right? All the possibly fake people on Twitter we see that are parroting the same things over and over. There's those kind of people who are just meant to toe the party line. And then there's, obviously like military contingent as well, because you can't just run through, just like Palpatine. He had to get this clone army up and running, and literally program them, and I think you can kind of see that, how that works, with our military. They are programmed to, and trust me,
you can even call them clones, because of how militant they have to be. And just follow orders, the brown shirts and everything. It's interesting too,
Absolutely.
when you think about how the metaphor kind of twists right in on itself too, because now we have AI, and
Yeah.
now Boston Robotics is freaking me out like constantly, you know. So ooh, how literal was George being?
Yeah. You know, clones, you know, they all had that kill switch in them. And, you know, Palpatine flipped the switch and they all did what they were supposed to do.
Right.
And, you know, that was I think it was a very intentional thing that he said there. And I think, you know, and obviously this isn't the area I've studied too much, but going back to kind of CIA, you know, brain manipulation, things like that, there's even things I think in that where they could say a word and they would, you know, people would be this personality or this, or
Right.
it would cause
Manchurian
them to go
candidates.
Manchurian candidate, cause them to go kill. So that kind of stuff is very, very creepy and very, very scary in how that will play out.
Have you seen some of those creepy videos all over Instagram of like some of the celebrities like freezing in time, or like popping weird faces for like a minute straight on camera? And it's like, all right, fine. If they're not like, you know, secret murder weapons, maybe they're fucking with us or something, but something is happening on that screen.
Hillary was like bobbing all like
or
Shaq,
like there's one of Shaq just like pulling a dumb face, and it's really creepy, man.
They're doing like the NBA halftime show and he's just like, and then and there's like a Beyonce one where she's like on stage like twirling around, but then like when you slow it down, you almost see like a demon face. Like it's really scary to actually look at, because that one is probably very, very close to reality. You know,
even if it's just us seeing it, you know, it's our insight, seeing what's really going on, because they're all connected, obviously.
And brainwashing, you know, that's kind of part of all of this. It's
culture,
brainwashing us through pop culture, both adults and children. You know, because if somebody wants to be an authoritarian, they know that they need to get the younger generation in line too, because they need somebody to step up when that time comes. You know, look no farther than like 1984, right? You know, at that point, like these kids were spies and the parents were scared of them, you know, because they were scared to think the wrong thing. And I mean, talk about how close we are to that, like we said, with AI and that kind of stuff, and kids. So that's another aspect. And obviously, you know, genocide is really where that's really the tipping point, you know, for them to, where a lot of that kind of stuff leads to, you know, the gun control leads right into that, you know, the genocide stuff. It's horrible and it's brutal and it's disgusting. And it's done for, you know, so many different reasons. It's been done so many reasons over religion and, you know, whatever could happen in the future, but it's, you know, it's done for like eugenics purposes too, right? I mean, people they want to wipe out, you know, here's the people from East blah blah blah, and here's the people from West blah blah blah. Like we hate those people, so we get rid of them. Now we just have our pure race, right? That's what we have now, and it's disgusting when people get to that point. But you know, that's why I talk about brainwashing leading up to that stuff, because when those kind of things happen, the people that are exterminated are seen as criminals, and they're seen as less than human. Obviously the you know, the World War II stuff, we all know about how all that went down, but you know, it's really no different than right now. People who didn't get the you know what, you know, are viewed as non-citizens. I mean, Justin Trudeau, I think you posted this earlier. Justin Trudeau was just saying something recently that they're not really part of the society. In the president of France has said something recently to that effect too, that people who haven't been
we tolerate these people?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, you know, and I go into in detail in the book. I won't go into too much here, but there's this whole thing that this guy laid out. He was a former government official, about the 10 stages of genocide.
Yes.
And you see how this stuff plays out. So no different than we talk about how a totalitarian regime is played out. There's all these sub things within there. So the genocide, it rolls out, like the propaganda happens, and it dehumanizes people, and then they start preparing stuff, and then it happens. And then the very last stage, which is the most frightening stage of this 10 stages of genocide, after the genocide happens, is denial. They deny that anything even happened. And that's happened so many times in history. One of my favorite bands, System of a Down, they've always talked about the Armenian Genocide,
Yes.
which occurred right in like the early 1900s, which was suppressed and repressed, all the knowledge, all the history for many, many years, because the people that did it just would not take responsibility for it. And, the people that put in the history books would not put that stuff in there. So it's, you see, that's the most terrifying thing to me is the denial of it, the denial of atrocities.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what becomes of, and that's the thing, that's it seems like history is cyclical, and we seem to all be already set up very vulnerably to be picked apart. And it's almost as if maybe it's our deep memory of the last time we were broken like this or something.
Right.
The leftovers of us after all was revealed and all was apparent, those that had to live with themselves or live with their lives, and that horrible mentality passing down through generations. And we talked about, before the show, you and I were briefly touching on how narcissism is something that can get passed down generationally. And, you see it on the family level, you see it in groups, but man, when it comes to these elites that are, nepotism is the name of the game already for fucking centuries. It's like, that is the most severe, potent form of it that you can imagine. And it just comes together in the worst storm.
And, too, like, and it's on the flip side, there's like we're saying, those terrible tendencies, those terrible traits get passed on for generation. One other terrible thing that happens too is that there's always a contingent of people who could have done something, but they didn't, or they did something too late. And at the end of, the prequel trilogy, Revenge of the Sith, both Obi-Wan and Yoda were basically looking at each other, scratching their heads, like what the hell happened? Like, they didn't realize anything that was going on, that Palpatine was manipulating even them this entire time. And then, they both basically, went into isolation, went into exile for 20 years, and just contemplating on, what went wrong and what they could have done better. And, as we know, things do turn out better in the end. But, at that moment, they had to be telling themselves, like, damn, we trusted the government. We trusted our leaders. We did everything we were supposed to do. And then but we were too late. We were focused on the wrong thing. They were led astray. They were focused on a war that was all manipulated by the Palpatine. And they spent so much of their time focusing on that war. They didn't spend any time doing introspection, doing meditation, things that monks are supposed to do.
Yeah, you just took the thought right out of my head, man. It's like, man, they undo their own vows of, the Jedi Order almost. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's
what they do, don't they? They get us to act like them.
Yes.
I was just talking to my wife upstairs about when Gaddafi fell, when Muammar Gaddafi was given over to the people. At least, I mean, hey, it's been a long time. I don't know how manipulated that story was. Who knows? We're saying he was evil.
Right.
When the US government says that about other leaders, I guess you kind of have to wonder what's really going on, but whatever. The face on the front facing story of Gaddafi, when they handed him over and the people basically just ripped him to shreds and let him get, they were raping him, all kinds of horrible things. And that was like the biggest sorrow for me in that moment when I saw that on the news back then, because I was like, they've become exactly as he has raised them to be.
Yes.
And man, if that's not cyclical as well. And we're talking about that lasting scar, and perhaps that too, maybe even what a lot of people in our community, even you, even me, are feeling, this kind of negative, this rage, this anger towards that part of our society that's doing this, or the ones that are manipulating them. What if our wrath and our rage is also part of that carrying scar that creates those generational curses too?
Right. It's that whole conversation about like your energy, you're loose, right? You're expending, you can expend it however you want, right? Like we all have an internal budget of our own energy that we can spend on anything. And, sometimes it's fun to laugh and yell and cry and whatever about some of this stuff, but it's like, you're right. At the end of the day, is that energy just being harnessed against us? Should we just rather be spending time, setting up a parallel community or something, or just focusing on our friends, our family, things we like to do, music, our podcast, all this kind of stuff. There's and I think we all go down that rabbit hole, but I think it's a balancing act we all have to play, in that when you start to kind of see yourself going there, like, listen, I just need to disconnect for a little bit here. Me being on Twitter, scrolling through 35 more posts, it's not going to, there's not going to be a positive aspect of that. Even if I learn something really new, it's probably something really terrible. Also. So maybe when I go take a walk instead, so I think it's all about harnessing that energy and focusing. The Jedi did not do that. It was 100% focused on, basically statism, right? They just did everything the government told them to do. And, the government was being run by Satan, he was being run by Lucifer. And, they realized it too late, but at that point it was pointless. So and that's kind of the point of the book is, there's these signs, there's these little warnings that you can kind of see whenever you hear leaders saying stuff.
Right.
The simplest one is, hey, we want to keep you safe. Like, you need to do something to keep yourself safe. Like, you're not doing the right thing. And it's like, wait a second. I am, just because you're telling me there's something I'm supposed to be doing that I'm not, that shouldn't change my life. And unfortunately, so that it's nailed into us so much on and on and on throughout pop culture, throughout TV, mainstream, all that kind of stuff. And to a certain point, it just people just they just internalize that and they parrot it back out, and that's just kind of how they are and how they live. And it's kind of sad.
It's a denial of nature on all levels, right? Because what you're talking about here is kind of like a natural law kind of theme, and that's something that has been just removed from our dialect. It's been removed from our culture. It's one of the most banned topics or warned about topics on YouTube that I've seen in recent years since I've been getting into it. So many, you could find plenty of videos on it, natural law on YouTube, but I think some of the heavier hitters, the people that are really digging in deep and they know all the right wording to really express what we need to know in the right way, are getting super censored. Like, I'll bring up this guy, shameless plug, this guy Mark Passio. If you haven't heard him, everybody should go check out his work. I'd like to get him on the show at some point because he has a lot of work on natural law, and it's removed and banned and shadow banned and all that stuff. And the thing is, we've been divorced from it for so long. We just don't know what it is. And we can even find it silly, but it's just an unwritten form of human behavior that is undeniable. And what totalitarianism seems to me is that it's just, as always, it's a denial of that nature, and they deny it on every level they possibly can,
Right. And even, just the word itself, nature. One thing I always think about in Star Wars is that you see a sharp contrast between societies that live focused on nature and the world and in that surroundings versus like this technological monster. Mm-hmm. And, so many examples, like look at the Ewoks in the original Star Wars, right? Kind of this rudimentary kind of society, but them all banding together is able to do great things and topple these giant machines that come into their village. And then look back at episode 1, sorry, I'm going to mention Jar Jar.
With the Gungans, yeah.
The Gungans, they take out the droid army. And then you see the Wookiees do it again in episode 3. And then I started watching this new Boba Fett series, and now, spoiler alert for anybody, it's not really a spoiler, but he's living amongst like the Sand People, and they're trying to take out some of these technological things in the area because, like, I think they have a hatred of technology. I don't know what the story is, but like
they're us,
they're us. But a lot of these stories I think are very important because they end up it's kind of a hopeful story of using nature, using things that are natural, right? using, when we talk about natural law, natural elements, all this kind of stuff against these things that are in essence unnatural, whether it's an unnatural law, whether it's an unnatural machine, right? These things were not organically created. These things are really a slap in the face of kind of how things were created. So I think in Star Wars, that's kind of an important thing on a very symbolic level, not just on a kind of a war/rebellion kind of level, but just that side is a lot of times ultimately victorious over that unnaturalness.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. It's interesting too. I honestly never really zoned in on this. The fact that the Empire does not seem to, at least in the movies, have a home planet. There is no home,
right?
Because there's no sentiment left.
Yeah.
It's gone. Just be mobile, be more efficient, be automated. It's exactly where we're headed to.
Exactly. Yeah. They have their Death Star. I mean, they have their
home away from home.
they have that capital city, but that's not really.
Oh, okay. Where is that? Where's the capital city?
Coruscant. So like they basically,
Coruscant, right.
I think some of the story goes that like they destroyed the Jedi temple and probably built like a Sith shrine or something there in its stead or something. But it wasn't really like their home. But you're right. Like you see the
They're
Death Star.
everywhere.
They're everywhere. Even
right.
even in like the Disney movies, right? Like they're out they're all these like space hobos basically, but they got these humongous ass spaceships, but it's like a floating city.
Yeah. It's like a motorcycle gang, but way more intense.
Right. It's like they have so much power, but like they also have no emotional kind of center. I think that's kind of and it kind of goes back to the tactics. And one thing I don't talk about in the book, but I just kind of thought of is there's an animated series called Star Wars Rebels, which it took place a few years before like the original movie. So it's as the rebels are kind of trying to build up. And there was an episode where a rebel spy and an Imperial officer are both stranded on this like moon, right? And so it's kind of like that story. It's like, oh, they're enemies, but they have to kind of work together to kind of get out of the situation. And sure enough, they do. But at the end of the day, the rebel goes back to his team and everybody's giving him hugs and high fives and this and that. And it's kind of giving me chills. It's kind of sad. The Imperial officer goes back to his base and just sits in his room. Like nobody, he gets no thanks. He gets no credit. There's nothing. There's just a coldness about it. And I think that's very important because I think a lot of people think that aligning with these governments, aligning with these totalitarian, it's like a warm, fuzzy feeling. It's like you're part of a family, but they don't see you as part of a family. They just see you as a tool that once that tool gets bent or once we have a better tool, you're going in the garbage. It's a very, very important point that nobody ever learns. And we can talk about it to death, but the people that are aligning themselves with that, they will never learn. They're already too far in. They will never learn until it's too late, until they're rounded up and whatever. It's very sad, but at the same time, we all make choices in life. And if you make bad choices, you're going to have to pay the consequences for those.
Right. I would say that I know some people that are on the fence right now, and maybe it is still too late ultimately or something. I don't like to think that way necessarily yet, but they're coming into the game quite friggin' late, obviously.
Yeah.
But for people like that are kind of still on the fence, why don't we get into some of the Star Warsian dialectic and how it relates and parallels to a lot of the totalitarian terminology and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of created this kind of 3-step process, and like we said at the top, it's very similar to what we always talk about, the problem, reaction, solution, right? A problem is created by the people in power. It elicits a reaction. Something needs to change, something needs to happen, and then they provide a solution. But all those times the solution they wanted at the beginning, so they kind of create a fictitious problem. So when I think about Star Wars, Palpatine does the same thing in the prequels. He creates these problems, but as I was reading through the novels and watching the movies, they keep using the word crisis. This is a crisis. This is a crisis. There's the Naboo crisis. There's a crisis with this separatist army attack. So I'm like, why don't we put the word crisis there instead of problem? Because I think problem, I think it does what you need it to do, but when you have the word crisis, I think that it ratchets it way the fuck up. It you know, the COVID crisis, the 9/11 crisis, all these are all encompassing crises that affect nearly everybody. You know, there's always a crisis that happens, and you know, I'll just use one example. It's from you know, the Phantom Menace, the first movie in the Star Wars, in the prequel trilogy. You know, there's a trade dispute. The people this trade federation is blockading the planet of Naboo. There's a war starting to happen. So, you know, that's a huge crisis. You know, there's people, they're invading this planet. The people are being rounded up. There's going to be war, this and that. People are going to be dying, etc. So that's a crisis. That's a crisis. Right. And then you get to kind of the second phase, which, you know, in the problem, it's reaction. And, you know, there's always a reaction because, you know, you say, oh my God, something needs to happen. So instead of the word reaction, I wanted to make it something more like a verb, like something that's being done, like something is specifically happening. So if we use the word consent in there, so now we have crisis and then we have consent, because consent is consent is key. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons where we are in the past 2 years COVID crisis is because everybody has consented to doing X, Y, or Z. We all know. Which is
always the reaction. The reaction is the consent. Yes. Whatever the consent looks like, it's always that. Okay.
Yes. Like so, you know, people have given consent for this and that. And in Star Wars, you know, the consent that needed to happen was that the senators had to be made to realize that their current leader wasn't doing anything about this crisis.
Right.
You know, he was too bogged down in bureaucracy. There's probably some, you know, shady dealings going on there. So they gave the consent to put in an order for a vote of no confidence against this leader. Okay, so they say, listen, we all agree, and of course, Palpatine made people to agree. We all agree that, you know, we consent. Something needs to change. Okay. And then you get to the third phase, which, you know, problem, reaction, solution. In this one, we're calling it crisis, consent, and control. You know, the solution, it always is about control anyway.
It's always control.
It's always about control. So the control in this is that, you know, Palpatine manipulated this crisis from the start. You know, if anybody listening, go back and watch those movies. He manipulated both sides of this event to happen, from the trade dispute and then from the other side. So he manipulated all that to happen. He caused the consent for people to want to get that leader out, and then he gains control. You know, and then you basically see this process repeated in each of those prequel movies in a one way, shape, or form, and even in some animated stuff, which I talk about too. So it's and it's a rollout I think we can all understand and see how that happens. You know, obviously, like we said a little bit about the COVID stuff, not to get too crazy in it because we've all talked this shit to death. But you know, the COVID crisis, right? There's a crisis, there's a disease, blah blah blah. You know, we all consent. Okay, now we'll lock down. Now we'll wear masks. Now we'll do this. Now we'll do that. And then ultimately, the government now knows they can have more control. If this is the end game for them, I don't know. But at least part of their science project was to find out how, you know, what contingent of people were willing to consent, you know, for this big giant thing here. And then the control. Right now, they want to probably do track and trace stuff, more surveillance, more vaccine passports, this and that. Any and all ways to control people even more is where it is and where it's heading to.
Yeah. That's it always ends there with control. And it is interesting about the end game aspect, because I think everyone who says they hate us, they hate you, they're pretty spot on about that in a lot of ways. I don't think they want to deal with us as much as they have to. They don't want to deal with us any more than they absolutely have to. You know what I mean? So I'm very curious about, like, yeah, they want to know where we are at all times. I get that. Like the whole having everyone on lock and key and making more money for themselves. It's weird to know that they clearly have a lot more wisdom about the situation on Earth than us peasants do, right? Because they're locked into the control mechanism. Yet they want to continue to run the jail. It's very weird. I don't know if you think about that often, but it gets me hung up quite often. And that leads me into all sorts of fantastical ridiculousness, like the 13 families and the bloodlines and how far back this goes. And why would someone give a shit about 1,000 years from now just because of their lineage? Maybe a few guys here and there, but it's creepy how deep rooted it goes. And I'm not sure if there's any parallels, probably more in the novels than the movies itself, but is that a possible parallel that I'm unaware of in Star Wars? Does George ever dig into like some parallels with like deeper conspiracies or anything about like how far back, or does it just start with Palpatine? Does that kind of represent that aspect?
Yeah, I think it just kind of represents that aspect. You know, I know for him, excuse me, you know, for him, it all goes back to like World War II. You know, he was a huge World War II buff, you know, so that's really where a lot of his stuff, even, you know, the tertiary stuff, like how the planes were flying and this and that, you know, he studied all that kind of stuff. But then he kind of knew how, you know, the rise of Hitler and all that. But I think, you know, one thing I will say to your point just there is why they want to keep doing this. Is it?
I wouldn't want to. My God,
no.
That seems like a lot of annoying responsibility.
Yeah,
from a sociopathic point of view.
And it's almost just, is it just a gigantic game to them? Do they like torturing people? I mean, we know they like torturing people, and we don't have to get into all that kind of stuff, but we know they like torture. And, you know, they love that. I know I see you have that King Kill 33 back there. You know, they love the revelation of the method, right? They love that they can slowly put this stuff out into the ether for us to see, knowing damn well what's going to happen and us not really being able to stop it to a certain extent. I think they love that kind of stuff. It's like, I think about that. I don't know if you ever saw that horror movie of, it was this guy in Australia where he would capture people and then he would let them free. And then he'd just be hunting them like with his sniper rifle. Like this, do they have that kind of sick, psychotic mentality that they want
dangerous game?
Yeah. Like, is that the only way, like, for them to get off? Right? That's the only thing that gets them to a level, right? Because they've done everything else under the sun. That let's just play with humanity at this point, and we'll never be able to really understand that kind of thinking. But you know, that could be part of it. But you're right. I mean, it's either that or they are more incompetent than we think. You know, I think maybe that we give them too much credit sometimes, because if they really wanted to do this right, they probably could have years ago, and they never did. So
perhaps it's just the force ghost in the machine running things, and it's really not the individuals. You know, it's the Hydra metaphor: cut one head off, 10 grow back, or 3 grow back, or whatever it is, because it's really not the human, the individual that's doing this. It's back to that narcissism thing. It almost feels like some kind of possession on humanity. It's very bizarre.
Have you ever heard of George Lucas's first movie called THX 1138?
Yeah, and it's been way too long since I've seen it, and it's I do remember it being grueling because it was slower. It was his first film, but the messaging, I was too young to really pick up on it. But I've looked back on that many times ago. I got to rewatch that. That's got to be one.
and that's one where it's like a totalitarian government, but like you never really even see who's in control. You know, and there was kind of a weird, you know, and there's just constant messages just being pumped into all the public arenas, right? You know, like, listen, make sure you do this, buy more economy, like all these just catchphrases. And it's kind of silly when you hear
like
it.
They live, right?
Yeah, just like they live. Or it's like when you walk into like a CVS, it's the same damn thing. You hear these things being pumped, like, make sure you stay 6 feet away, make sure you follow the line. I'm like, am I living
Get
in this?
vaccinated here.
Yeah, am I living in this freaking movie? But like, you know, one weird thing about that movie, and I definitely encourage anybody to check that out. You know, that kind of got Lucas down this totalitarianism topic, is that one shot throughout the movie, and it cannot be coincidental, is that it shows this huge circuit board of all this stuff, of all the, you know, it's probably programming all these messages being shot out there. But on this circuit board, on these wires, is sitting a lizard. And I saw that, and I paused, and I'm like, wait a second. That's either just him just being weird, or him trying to say, to your point, like is there something more? Is there another force going on here that he's just trying to like nudge us with, or is he just telling a joke? But I think to me, it was almost kind of like a Wizard of Oz kind of moment. Like, is this whatever this is supposed to be? Is this the one really running the stuff? You don't know. It's left ambiguous, which I kind of like about movies sometimes.
Yeah, this parallels something I heard recently, and even though I don't like the source from where I heard it, and I won't mention the name, but it was a government official involved in the UAP, ridiculousness that's been going on for so long. But God, he said, I'll paraphrase that, you know, they compartmentalize the information, and they do mini disclosures, because if you were to ever see what's really going on behind the closed doors, and what the phenomenon really is all about, your brains would melt into pieces. It's not just that we'd have pandemonium on the planet because there'd be aliens. It is so bizarre. And honestly, I don't like the source, because I think they spin a good game. That's all they're ever doing. But that's always been my take too. Like, okay, fine, we're imagining gray aliens and reptilians and whatever. I think the whole, I mean, this is to go on a completely different tear, but I kind of feel like at least the aliens that they're trying to sell us on is all a big psyop for something so fucking bizarre that they probably can't tell us. Not for our safety though, not because our brains would melt and they would feel bad, for some other reason. I don't know, man. There's a reason we think that these little green guys. There's a reason we think they're ET, you know, because it's just, they have to give us this kind of comedic little funny thing to make it seem so silly and so ridiculous, that, or even like Bigfoot, like anytime you bring that stuff up, like, oh, you're just a crazy person. It's like, well, no, we've been programmed to think that anybody who believes in that stuff is a crazy person, or they just watch too many movies. But there's something deeper going on. And, you know, even in a Star Wars parallel to that is that the Jedi kind of start to get wind of what Palpatine's doing, like with these clones that he has, right? They started to figure out that how these clones were created is kind of not what it was, not the way it was meant to happen. And Yoda basically says kind of what you just said right there, what the government official says, like, listen, we can't let this stuff get out into the public, because then if people are uncomfortable or unsure about how these clones were created, then they're not going to, you know, trust them going forward. And all kinds of other stuff. And they're not going to trust us because we're the ones who went along with this the whole time. So that was kind of part of their self-manipulation into hubris to their own part. They were the fog of war, the fog of the dark side. It kind of started bringing them down. And that was Palpatine's whole plan, was like, just destroy these guys from the inside out. But because they had those kind of fears because of what the public would think if that stuff came out. And man, I mean, you know me, I love the religion and the spiritual side of it, and this is every nemesis, every Satan, they're all like this. They have all this same totalitarian quality. And I often cite that Satan sounds a lot like system, and they share all the same qualities. So, you know, this going back to Star Wars, bringing it back to Star Wars, man. What do you think? Do you think, I kind of asked you a similar question at the end of our last talk, but I'll ask it to you again in a different way. Do you think movies in general that have all this quote unquote predictive programming in it, do you think we are even understanding predictive programming efficiently, or do you think there's a piece of it that's still missing because of all of our unknowns? For what I'm getting at is, are the movies giving us solutions, or are they programming us into slavery, in your opinion?
Right.
Or
So
do you
yeah,
think it could be a little bit of both? I just want your opinion on that.
yeah. So is it kind of that revelation of the method, right? It's like we're telling you what's going to happen, and there's no damn way you're going to be able to stop it, or this is a way for it to be changed, to be fixed. I think they're partially true, but I think that when they give us like the hope, like I think we may have touched on this a little bit last time, but I think it's worth going over again. But one of the big keys of Star Wars is hope. And, I think hope is eternal. Hope is forever. Hope is very, very, very important. I don't want to lose that out from what I'm about to say. But I think when they tell us about hope in movies, I think they're telling us that, hey, you can do anything. You can fight back. You can do this. You can do that. You can be anything you want. You can be Luke Skywalker. You can do this. And I think, and mind you, I think that's a great thing to think. And I think it's great for us to do what we're doing, right? Fighting back against this and that. But it's like, at the same time, do they know that in the real world that, I guess I'll quote Star Trek, resistance is futile.
I was just going to say it's futile.
Like, did they kind of know that? And like, look at something else like, the Hunger Games or anything else where there's like a rebellion that's brewing, that they're fighting back. It's a great concept, but how does that work in actuality? Going back to your point about, the Gaddafi thing, a lot of rebellions, I think, throughout history just end up becoming the thing that they were fighting against.
Right.
They end up as terrible as that. So I think that's part of it. I mean, I think there also is some legitimate hope that they are trying to show, and also just to give people a little bit of breather outside of their real lives for a few minutes. I think that's very important. But also I think they are giving us some truths, but they're giving us, 130 out of the 1,000-piece puzzle that we're intentionally never going to be able to kind of figure out. I mean, I think we all have the thoughts and ideas about how some of this stuff works and what they're trying to tell us with this, but it's I don't think just based on pure time, I don't think any of us are going to be able to ingest all that knowledge, just because of the time we're given to know that kind of stuff. But I think there's some, I will give credit that some of it may be unintentional too. I think there's always an aspect. I think, sometimes the simplest explanation is the simplest thing. It's that, some of these things are in there because, George Lucas thought it was a cool idea or this and that. I don't think every single thing is a psyop or this and that. And, when psyop with Star Wars in general and most sci-fi is that, working side by side with robots, right? Like that's kind of the future. But that's true. I mean, that's an actual thing that was happening then. That's happening more and more now too. So,
that's kind of what I was getting at. Like predictive programming, it's a fine line between like how much is all parts of consciousness on this planet being predictively programmed into a flow of history or something like that. Maybe it is out of everyone's control and they just know it or something like that,
Yeah.
But it also brings me to an interesting thought. You made me think of this, and this is actually pretty spiritually aligned with other traditional spiritual thinking, is that maybe the fact that the rebellion becomes the totalitarian eventually, maybe that's the only way we all, I don't know, in like some sort of macro sense, understand one another. Maybe that's how you walk a mile in someone else's shoes. You find out the roots of the narcissist and what happened to create that. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's more of a spirit side thing.
But they
outside of everything, kind of getting to experience that understanding. But
but you think about villains in movies, and Adam Driver, who played Kylo Ren, the villain in the new movies, he had a really great quote, and he's actually an ex-military guy. He doesn't do many interviews, but he said that villains see themselves as the hero.
Right.
And I think that's important, because to your point, you don't really know what that villain is going through. Not that you may care, but at the same time, it's about understanding. It's about understanding how people are, where they were, where they are now, where they're going. Because if you don't have that understanding of like we was talking about earlier about those traits of those people, and how they grow from so many different circumstances. One thing I mentioned in the book is that children that grow up in either like a very like physically or sexually abusive environment, or kids that are just living in like an apathetic environment where they don't receive any love, and like emotional neurons are not firing throughout their life, and it's very sad, and it makes me very sad to know that there's people that have some of that. Not saying they all turn out to be terrible people, because these things can adapt and evolve, but they're playing with half a deck, unfortunately, and those people can be manipulated by these type of organizations to do terrible things, because they're used to that negativity.
It's unchecked behavior. It's the narcissist or the victim of the narcissist that doesn't go through the self-discovery process, and unfortunately, I think, of course, that self-discovery, that awakening, whatever you want to call it, that's not a guarantee in life. It doesn't happen to everybody. You can meditate all you want. You can take as many psychedelics as you want. You don't necessarily get that. You don't. I mean, I know it's being kind of sold that way in our culture these days. Like, just get to these other realms and you'll figure it. You'll get to that spiritual zone or whatever. But I think a lot of people end up chasing it forever, or they don't, or they never come to the realization that it even is existent, and it's real. So they run these horrible cycles forever without ever knowing the potential of getting rid of it. And it's very tragic in that sense. Awareness, right? Just spread more awareness.
Hey, quick rabbit trail. Are you into Star Trek at all?
Not as much as I would like to be. I know some of the lore, but not anywhere near as much as I would love to get more into like the classic movies and stuff, and even watch Generation again.
I'm with you. It's one thing that I've wanted to get into it, but it's one of those like right versus left things, or like you can't like Star Wars and Star Trek kind of thing.
Right.
But like that's horse shit. Like, but
dude, the Wrath of Khan, man. Oh, dude, yeah.
But like I really want to look into that stuff more, specifically because, and I kind of want your take, since probably a little bit more about this than I do. But both Star Wars and Star Trek technically have like a totalitarian government, right? Because in Star Trek, it's technically like a one universe government, isn't it? Like this federation. How does that work?
Well, so it really depends, because so in Star Wars, all the races are so intermingled, and you get a little bit of that in Star Trek, at least from my understanding. I am not a Trek guy, so I could be corrected very fast, but in my understanding, the different races and species from all over the galaxies aren't as together as they are in Star Wars. Because you have the Klingons that hate everybody, but it's a very warlike species, and they very bad relations, and the whole idea of the what do they call that, the directive, the primary directive or something, do not interact with other species for the most part, unless they're at least as advanced as you are and everything. It is a different setup for sure, but it is curious that, if anything, you're kind of seeing the totalitarian government from the protagonist point of view,
right?
Where you are off fucking green women and battling lizards and stuff, and it's interesting. They turned it into a hero thing, or
that's kind of what I heard,
did that before Star Wars, I believe. So
because that's what I heard about Roddenberry. I heard that he had some type of communistic leanings himself. So like you said, making it from a protagonist perspective, like, this is a great thing. We're all sharing the galaxy together. This is awesome. Like, nothing can go wrong. But to your point, it's like when you're looking at it from that point of view, you're always the good guy. Look at America circa 2002, 2003. we were all gung ho, like, yeah, go get those motherfuckers. You know,
I just thought
we
of Team
gotta go
America
get them.
right
Yeah,
away,
well,
man.
fuck
Like,
yeah.
America. Just like that ultimate sarcasm in that movie was the best analogy for what
Yes.
you're talking about. Just America, you know, it's
Yes.
just so over the top.
And like, you know, I can talk now about, you know, how war is terrible and all this stuff, but like I was back. I'm not gonna lie. Back then, I was like, "Oh, go bomb these people back to the Stone Age. Go do this. Go do that." It's because the propaganda was telling me like that's what I need to do. That's the American way. That's what we needed to do. But it's like, no, we were the villain in that story.
Yeah.
And you know, history will tell that. It's sad to think about that. But I think it's all about understanding where we were and how we can all change. I think all of us have changed our mentality since then about really understanding what's happening. But it's like, and I think with what's happened in the past few years, like, let's not let ourselves go down that rabbit hole again and think
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And that was it. Just like, not just trust that the government is has our best interests in mind, and that what we do and what we should say should be what they're telling us to do. So I think we've kind of learned from that, hopefully.
Yeah, like learn from history. Finally, it's an old one, and I know it's actually kind of at least the original is kind of divisive. Zeitgeist it came out in 2005, I think, 2000, maybe later. But Peter Joseph, the director, love him, hate him, disagree with some of what he says. He was he delivered the information in a brilliant fashion, especially in the second movie, which was called Zeitgeist Addendum. For anybody that hasn't seen it, it's old, but I think at least that second movie, the first half really stands up from my perspective, where he takes us all through the 20th century of all these other countries where we were basically running game on them the whole time, and you know, forcing them to outsource and all this. And started out with Kermit Roosevelt, but he was a card-carrying CIA member, so we got to stop doing that shit. We got to start bringing in some Chase Manhattan people and some private sector guys, and if they get caught, who cares? We sell them out. We don't care about them. Right. But so they show this, and for an audience at our age, we're both mid-30s back then, when I saw this, and it was just lining up all this right up into something that was relevant to me with Saddam Hussein and the Gulf War and all of this, I started to go, oh, holy shit. He just paints this perfect picture of, oh yeah, guess what? This ain't just history. This is happening right before your very eyes. And it's the same thing over and over again. Learn from history. Do you think that we are able to learn from history this time? Or do you think possibly before the Holocaust or something horrible like this in history, or a previous reset or something, do you think those people were also saying, well, we're pretty put together, we're gonna figure this out beforehand, we're not going to repeat history again because we remember history? What do you think it was? What do you think?
I think we want to think that we have that kind of stuff figured out, and either, like we said earlier, one of two things is that the powers that be are incompetent, or they have an extra plan B, plan C, plan D for us. That's something that we haven't even considered or contemplated. One thing I thought of, like a crazy thought, is that everybody, a lot of people that I know, a lot of people in the truth community, et cetera, is very big into, the Second Amendment, right? It's very, very important. It's you can protect yourself, you can protect your land, this and that. For all we know, they have some machine that can make all your guns just disintegrate or all your bullets just implode. So like, we all think that we have these solutions, but I think maybe they're already a step ahead of that stuff. But I think being hopeful is the key to all of it, regardless of if in the end we all get wiped out or all sent to, Australia, or something, regardless of what ends up happening. I think we need to keep that positive mindset. And like we've talked about it before, is that we can't get dragged down into the mud to play on their playing field, because their playing field is not on that spiritual, emotional plane that we deserve to be on. We don't deserve to be taken down, but we can only be taken down by ourselves. Right. So I think I think to your question, do we kind of have it figured out? I think a contingent of us haven't figured out whether that's enough to do anything. I don't know. And you've even seen when people have tried to get organized, like the anniversary we're about to come up on, just for a peaceful event, they were able to spin that in a certain way. So that was a huge false flag to de-incentivize people to band together. That was a huge blow, I think, to possible connectivity that people could have made going forward. But I'm eternally hopeful about everything. I always feel that there is a plan for things, that we're all here for a purpose. We're all here for a reason, and that, it's different for everybody, right? We're doing podcasts now. We weren't doing podcasts, 3-4 years ago, and here we are putting this stuff out here, and it's awesome. We're meeting awesome people and learning and experiencing things and laughing and at the absurdity and all that kind of stuff. It's like there's an eternal hope that I want to have, and I always want to convey, and I think that Star Wars conveys as well. And even at the end of that prequel era, the novel specifically says, like, even in the darkest of night, there are some that dream of dawn. So there's always another chapter, whether that, like you said, that was a reset, a something that we may not really know. I think there's hope.
Hell yeah, man. I would agree. And I would take it even a weirder step further and say that maybe from a transcendental point of view, we could say that we look at all of the drama of life, all of the negative and all of the good, after all is said and done, maybe someday. And we say, well, it was all just like playing a game, maybe it does turn out that way. But anyway.
And depending on how people feel about religious spirituality, death is not the finality. Right. Death is the end of one existence and the beginning of another. So regardless, wherever people stand on that, I think that's kind of a universal fact there.
Hell yeah, man. Well, the book is Intergalactic Totalitarianism. I loved it, and I'm going to be referencing it for a while. I got my little page markers in here and stuff, but you did a great job on it, dude. Congratulations. Thanks again for coming on. And for anybody who hasn't picked it up yet, please pick it up, reach out, or you get it through Amazon, right?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. You can get the paperback version. You can get the Kindle version and currently in progress, when this show drops, working really hard on the audiobook version. I know people have been asking me about the audiobook version. I do a podcast. I have to do an audiobook version.
Yeah.
I can't not do an audiobook. So I'm taking a lot of time to do it. I'm really, for anybody listening, I'm doing it just like I do my podcast. I'm doing a lot of editing. I'm doing a lot of background music, sound effects, that kind of stuff. I really want to make it like a really, really cool experience. And because I think it makes it more fun for the listeners. And also it may, you may not be able to hear some of my audio deficiencies in it as well. So by adding a lot of those different other layers in there, but I'm working real hard on that. So follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Konspiracy_Kyle. And I'll let everybody know when that drops.
Awesome, man. That's so great. And yeah, you definitely cannot outsource the audiobook. You got to do it yourself as a podcaster.
No.
There's no question at all. So I'm glad you're doing that, dude. That's going to reach a lot of people. And you're right. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and some of them cross the line between a performance and just a reading. And it really gets the reader involved, and it gives that extra dimension back to you that I think you can lose sometimes with audio nonfiction, information. Right. Sometimes it's harder to retain. So I think that gives it that extra dimension. I kind of played around with the thought of doing like different voices and stuff in there, but like, no, I don't think people want to hear me trying to do like a Yoda voice or like outtakes, man, outtakes.
I'll release like the full drama edition. Yeah, that'll be an exclusive.
Yeah, listen to Kyle do his Yoda impression and yell fuck about 17 times.
Yeah, totally takes away from all the points I was making, but it's good fun.
Oh man, this has been awesome, dude. Thanks again for coming back. And I hope everybody enjoyed this. And please go pick up Kyle's book, Intergalactic Totalitarianism.
Yes.
Not in favor of totalitarianism.
Yeah. I do want to be clear, so on Amazon, they give you two categories that you can put the book in. So I had to put it in science fiction, and then I'm scrolling through like there's like philosophy and this kind of stuff, and there's a category for totalitarianism and fascism. I'm like, it has to go in there. But when I look through there, I'm like, you're one of the best sellers in fascism. I'm like, wait, hold on a second. Let me be a little bit clear about what I'm doing here. Look through the other books there. You'll see it's like the fall of Nazi Germany, all this kind of stuff. So it's against. I'm true Antifa. I'm true Antifa.
Yes.
Okay?
All right, man. Awesome. Take care, and everybody, I hope you enjoy this book when you pick it up, because it's awesome. All right, everybody, take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deep Share Podcast. If you want to hear more, then hit that subscribe button. Follow me on all the social places, and remember, think for yourself, but don't always believe what you think. Till next time.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, that's hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
What do we know? What do we know? If I know what we know, then I can tell you what we know, and if someone else knows, okay? I mean...